Morning, everyone. For those of you who aren't familiar with who we are, I work for the British Property Federation, and we're a representative body for all those who own or invest in real estate. My role there is somewhat multifarious, but I'm currently working on all things Brexit, but happily not solely, and also working on the kind of productivity and industrial strategy brief. And that's really what kind of brings me here today, as over the past few months, we've been increasingly focusing on kind of tech and innovation. Sorry. So part of this is kind of a midterm report, because last year our CEO spoke at a similar event, and so I'm partly here to kind of report back on what it is we've been doing in the intervening period. And what my CEO Melanie said last year was really kind of four things that we needed to be focusing on. One was kind of making it easier for property CEOs to identify a long-term agenda. And that probably translates to the kind of the typical 5 and 10 year kind of time horizons, both from the sense of what they might be expected to deliver, but also what kind of trends, what kind of issues they might be expected to negotiate in delivering developments and adapting developments. And the other is to find regulation that doesn't fence out innovation. So whether that is from avoidance of the ratchet effect, entrenching the past, or whether that is from the point of view of trying to market make. Interesting article at the weekend by Nesta on governance sinkholes that kind of emerge where you create kind of new markets, aren't necessarily kind of regulated, contrary to the idea that regulation fences out innovation always. Actually, sometimes regulation kind of enable it. And the other is really about looking at the culture around data and real estate. In some areas, it's quite well developed, particularly around kind of financial indices, but in other areas, and particularly around kind of softer data, mobility data, for example, not quite as well developed. Some number of challenges at the industry level to negotiate that transcend kind of inter-firm competition, but actually are areas where some collaboration between firms might help. And finally, the customers understand buildings better than we do. I took from that really customers are often at the sharp end of wider trends in the economy, and actually how can building owners be more responsive to what it is their customers are experiencing. But also their increasing expectations, and we feel it in our discussions with government, being primarily an advocacy body, primarily a lobbying body. We experience a sort of a greater expectation from government and the wider economy on what it is buildings are expected to do and what places are expected to do for people. So responding to that, we felt that we needed a useful group to act as a sounding board and to advise us. So we brought together a tech and innovation working group, including the firms listed here. And what they've been working on is a series of kind of four things. One is looking at what kind of skills and talent the industry might need over the next sort of 20 to 30 years, looking at early years education, looking at secondary and tertiary education, and also looking at what kind of continuing professional development needs might be. And also looking at a series of case studies. I don't know about you, but when I hear the word case studies, sometimes I reach for my gun, but what we're talking about here is actually sort of getting those that have sought to transform to relate their experiences. Now, getting people to talk about trial is often easier than getting to people in the real estate sector to talk about error, but we're trying to encourage that kind of honest case study approach, so expect those to start filtering out towards the autumn. And further also looking at how we can start that dialogue with the government to get it to be more forthcoming about what it is planning in terms of its pathway towards releasing data around the real estate data that it holds, building APIs, for example, and talking about what its plans are for kind of the future of regulation. More on that in a second. And finally also tackling that data issue, that data challenge that I just spoke about, and more on that in a second. We issued a couple of reports that are widely available, one with the Future Cities Catapult, now the Connected Places Catapult, and another with Liquid Real Estate Innovation. Two or three common themes that came out of that was, one, a bit of a language and culture gulf between tech startups and and scale-ups, and also real estate companies, and needs to bring those two together. One of the things that we are working on in the context of those case studies as well is how you can articulate the needs of the real estate sector in a way that is more widely intelligible. Secondly, that there is a need for kind of authoritative information for real estate companies to understand what it is they should be paying attention to, hence the skills piece we're working on. And finally, also, the government needed to be more forthcoming with what it is it's working on, what is its future vision, its future roadmap on the kind of digital real estate, and more on that in a second. So really on the data side, the thing that we're working on at the moment as a supporter is the idea of a real estate data foundation, a not-for-profit that will seek to not collect data, not be a data holder, but actually seek to challenge the industry-level challenges around data. So that might be around basic hygiene and procedures around cybersecurity, rather than necessarily mandating a particular standard or protocol. Or it might be around, for example, what kind of standards and protocols are being developed on data exchange between organizations, of which there are many in the process, and what is it that actually the real estate sector might want from those standards. So trying to be a more kind of active and informed client in some ways. So that should be kind of up and running in shadow form by the autumn, and expect kind of invitations to get involved. And then on regulation, legislation, and public policy, the key thing we're working on at the moment, but not putting all our eggs in one basket, given the somewhat febrile political environment, is a sector deal with government for the built environment. And one of the key things that has emerged from that is that government is very keen, and the sector is also very keen on improving the sector's productivity, so getting more output for the same input from improved access to data and the promotion of prop tech. However, there are other goals underneath that, which are delivering more homes and improving housing quality, enabling the sector to diversify its workforce, and promoting clean growth. Those may not all say tech or innovation on the nameplate, but clearly, underneath those is the need to throw the kitchen sink at it, particularly on delivering net zero. So we see that as being core to each of these. Those headline bullets, underlying those is clearly a lot of somewhat messy detail, but the negotiations are currently ongoing with government, and we expect to be producing the deal towards the winter of this year, or community adjusted winter possibly, which may end up trailing into next year given the state of Brexit. And then finally, on understanding customers, that actually ended up forming a bit of a dialogue on where we thought the real estate sector was and what its perceptions were in the wider economy. So we commissioned Populus, the polling firm, to carry out an analysis of industry perceptions of the real estate sector. Surprise, there were some fairly wide misconceptions of what it is the real estate sector was. My particular favorite was that we were radiator salesmen, which was quite an eye-opener, but also involved interviews with MPs, with local councillors, media, and focus groups at various communities around the country. While there was quite a strong perception that we were a key contributor to the economy in terms of what we did on social and environmental contribution, actually a much more sort of neutral perception there. And while unfavourable perceptions around the sector were in a minority in the economy, among the general public and stakeholders, actually quite a lot of neutral perceptions. So a strong message there that actually the real estate sector probably needs to be more responsive and probably more forthcoming in talking to its customers and clientele. but also that we need to be sort of demonstrating what it is that many of our members do, but actually perhaps do so quietly in communicating what it is what value it is that the sector brings. So in November, we'll be publishing a redefining real estate kind of strategy that will set out kind of our roadmap to how we intend to help the industry connect better with customers and communities. So clearly our activities are kind of possibly of a slightly high level of abstraction, but we feel that actually there's some enabling work that we can do to help our members who are more at the sharp end to do what they do best. Wish you a very enthralling and interesting morning. Certainly looking forward to hearing the other speakers and the panelists myself. Thank you.